think part of me anyways is always looking at memory as a really interesting source of inspiration. But also memory in terms of how do you communicate with people on a very intimate level, particularly one-to-one or something that's a really private kind of conversation. How do you capture that and actually create sort of a public moment from that? So we ask people to basically say, you know, we're going to start this video camera basically like this, but we just ask you not to speak and just to really reflect on something about your life at that moment in time. And then it's not edited at all. It basically just starts from the beginning and then goes to a certain amount of time. And you know, for for the individuals in North Dakota, there was absolutely no sitting still, and so the most people could actually sit was like 6 minutes before you just felt like people were going to jump out of their skin.
Silent,
Silent, no interaction. So it wasn't like a talking head kind of like this thing. It was really to say, you know, give yourself like a moment of reflection, sort of how did you get here, and then we started the video camera, and then. It was really interesting where everyone goes, though, because you think that it's not going to be anything, but then after about a minute or two, people kind of settle down, or not settle down, and just even watching someone breathe, or blink, or look in the way that they do. It's really important for me to really identify that these are individuals and not just, you know, an iconic person here or something, so they each had their biography and something about them kind of, again, you know, a chance to say, like when you look at somebody in a portrait, and especially when it's a video, there is something very human and connecting about it. And so you actually can think like, oh, like I might know that person at some level, right? I could know this kind of person. So the project actually that sort of began this conversation was actually in a long-term care facility. They're over 30 minutes long, and it's also a generational thing where, you know, because most of the people were probably in their late 60s, 70s, and 80s, their understanding of a video camera was completely like, we don't care, it doesn't register, we don't even know. And so when we would explain to them, I would say, okay, you know, we're gonna, you know, so again, like, you know, I spent about 3 months at the nursing care home and actually would meet people and talk to people, and then really understand like what it means to actually care for someone who was aging. You know, it was things just like, you know, if someone's in a wheelchair, you want to come down to their eye level, right? And you know, simple things as like putting lotion on their hand was really important, and you know, small things like that. That it was like, for my understanding of like aging, was transformative. You know, and so I think that was the only way that I could say, oh, you know, if we create portraits, we want to create some sort of dignity for end of life, but we also want to say it's a little bit difficult to watch as well. But the interesting thing is, you know, you would think, oh, you know, like you don't tell them anything of what you're going to, you know, you don't direct or anything, and so you don't know what's going to happen. And it was really funny. Sometimes they would just fall asleep, or they would completely forget that there was actually a video camera, and it just sort of unfolds over time in this kind of like, that's like intensely human kind of way that you know. And then, you know, when we went to North Dakota, and again, sort of like, was like, how do we investigate and understand, you know, this culture and this, you know, the people that are here? It was exactly the opposite, right? It was like barely 5 minutes, everyone was like, I gotta go, right? You know, money is time. So it's been really fascinating to kind of say, like, when you have an extended amount of time, how is that time kind of spent in some way?
So they're hanging in a public space in the nursery?
They are. And again, there's a plaque that says, you know, these are the individuals, and then there's sort of an intensity that's there because half of the individuals who are in the portraits, including this gentleman, has passed away. And so even that transformation of saying, you know, here's somebody that people knew, to the portraits being something that kind of gives people great comfort, because now there's a transition almost between them being here and not being here, to them actually then almost being like, you know, a painting of somebody in the 1800s, where it's like you don't know the individual, but you know someone like them in some ways, which I, like, I'm honored to actually be able to say that that sort of has that function there.